the rustle of grass, the clatter of hoofs, the whistle of string, and the whiff of a step wind that fell into a hollow stem. All these sounds that surrounded our ancestors. Listening, people learned to play them, inventing a variety of musical instruments. Mobile, lightweight, and convenient for nomadic life. It's a project about musical instruments created by the great nomadic civilization. The voice of the wind is the sound of a great step. It rustles in the mane of a fast horse, rustles due to a feather grass, crowns of spruce trees, and whispers because of scent of bitbagdala. Born out of clay, burned by fire, it sings with the wind. Sazsyrnai, the most ancient wind musical instrument. The shape resembles a chicken egg with the size of a fist. It really is the embodiment of four natural elements: earth, water, fire, and air. Wetting his hands in the water, the master molds it out of clay, then burns it with a flame of fire, and then the wind song is born. This tool can be made from different types of clay, but it must be specially prepared. Viscose mass of clay should be filtered to rid it of even the smallest grains of sand. Clay is different: red, black, sometimes yellow and green. The appearance of the clay affects the sound of the instrument. I realized this during an experiment, giving different forms to Sazsyrnai. I listened to their sound. It all depends not only on the form, but also on the clay. This is one of the oldest wind instruments. According to the classification, it belongs to the whistling flutes. Around the world, tool that looks like Sazsyrnai is called ocarina, which means duck in Italian. In 1860, it was invented by Giuseppe Donati. In all nations of the world, it repeats a near spherical shape with several openings.
Sazsyrnai
Sazsyrnai is very pleasant in perception, in common with many similar musical instruments of the world. The sound is perfect in its own way. Why is it perfect? If we talk about the Kazakh music, it surprisingly fits into the timbre palette of the Kazakh musical instrumentalism. It is of medium range, register, and very deep sound. Like all Kazakh national instruments, absolutely everyone. In the modern Kazakh instrumentation, there are whole choruses of Sazsyrnai. They are of different sizes, shapes, and of course, they differ in sound too. And each of these clay instruments has its own name: Uldek, howling wind; Usrik, bitter cold; or Tastavik, stone chicken. The sound is extracted due to the flow of air going at an angle. The flow should be as light as the breath of breeze. It is from the breath that the power of the sound depends. So the main thing here is not the work with fingers, but exhalation. But when and how did Sazsyrnai appear? Kazakh musicologists link the birth, or rather to say, the revival of this instrument with the name of Professor Bulat Sarbayev, an ethnographer, a man who made a great contribution to the reconstruction of the traditions of Kazakh music and ancient instruments. In the 70s of the last century, a clay artifact was got in his hands, which was found on the site of ancient settlement Otrar. The object was egg-shaped, hollow, and had only 2 holes.
A
writer, Dukenbay Dozhanov, brought Sazsyrnai to Bulat Sarbayev. There is a reason for a name they came up with. Sarbayev was collecting the information from local old people and asked how this tool could be called and whether the find could be considered as a tool in general. South Kazakhstan, the village of Shaldir, a few kilometers away, is the ancient site of Otrar, which was burned by the army of Genghis Khan in 1220. Time is just beyond our control. It erases cities, destroys fortresses, washes its dust from walls. How many incredible and tragic stories does the land of Otrar keep? And it seems the whole bitterness of life is brought to us by the wind sound of the ancient Sazsyrnai. In 1967, the history teacher of the local school, Sazsyrnai Alimov, and his students went on an excursion to the settlement Otrar. It was then that a unique artifact was found. Today, a letter from Sazsyrnai Alimov with memories of the day when the progenitor of modern Sazsyrnai was found is kept by the local historian Abdullah Jumashev. And the children ran over the ruins of the fortress and in a few minutes gathered a whole bunch of fragments of ceramic dishes. It should be said that in those days, ceramics and fragments of all utensils were literally on the land. Otrar Museum Reserve has not been opened then. And now among the broken pieces, I noticed a small object slightly smaller than an egg, hollow inside. I looked closely and realized that this is not an ordinary thing. I remembered how in childhood we made similar whistles from clay. They are called Sazsyrnai. Here it should be said that in the times of childhood of Sazsyrnai Alimov, Otrar citizens didn't know what Sazsyrnai is. Indeed, historians and musicologists don't deny the hypothesis that Sazsyrnai was originally children's fun. They emphasize that the Kazakhs have always been a musical people. Children's fun, like whistle. This is a flute type. Some tools are generally of elementary whistle type. For example, Sazsyrnai, and they are available for the child to learn literally. In the traditions of the Kazakh people, there was such an interesting whole aesthetics for the development of the aesthetic child. See how many tools there are. Initially, the konarau in the cradle hangs over the baby, attracts his attention, and thanks to the sound his perception of musicality develops. Shankobus in the hands of the mother, and if she puts rings, Konarau and Shankobus will make a sound. It is generally amazing. And then the baby grows up, and he is given a tuyaktasik, hooves, a Sazsyrnai, one horn on the other horn. And these are the sounds of hoofs. These are the sounds of nature itself. These are the sounds of his environment, life. Sazsyrnai, found by teacher Asantai Alimov, really looked more like a child's toy and didn't look like a modern version of a musical instrument. From a pair of holes, he made a primitive sound, but the historian was convinced that in his hands an artifact that had been silent for many centuries and now will change the idea of the Kazakh musical culture. Asantai Aga was an emotional person, especially when they found any artifacts. He was a real museum employee. When they found the Sazsyrnai, I remember that he held it with trembling hands so carefully that he did not even dare to touch with his lips. He repeated everything. You do not even understand what an important find this is. And he kept saying that it was necessary to investigate it. Asantai Alimov decided to give the Otrar Sazsyrnai to Almaty to the musicologist and ethnographer Bulat Sarbayev, with the help of the writer Dukin Baydosjanov. After all, this man was called the archaeologist of music. Having received an ancient instrument, Bulat Sarbayev immediately became involved with his research, collecting the history of Kazakh musical instruments bit by bit. He began to search through distant owls for still living carriers of the folk tradition of Sazsyrnai. This is called Syrnai, and this is Tastavuk. Most often, they have compiled Dombra. Having traveled almost the entire republic, Bulat Sarbayev collected data from various written and oral sources. So the old man in the south of Kazakhstan, having seen the ancient instrument, named it the Syrnai of Farabi. And there are several explanations for this. First of all, the greatest Eastern scholar, Abu Nasr al-Farabi, was from Farab, also called Otrar. Secondly, al-Farabi was not only a philosopher and mathematician, but also a music theorist. His main work in this sphere was the big book on music, Kitab al-Musika al-Kabir. This treatise became the most important source of information about the music of the East and the ancient Greek musical system. In this book, Farabi gave a detailed definition of music, revealed its categories, and described musical instruments. Today, in the homeland of the scientists in the south of Kazakhstan, the Al-Farabi Museum is opened in the Otrar district. Its founder is the same Abdullah Jumashev, to whom Asantai Alimov, who discovered the first time Otrar Sazsyrnai, handed over his letters. This Aksakal, the researcher of the life and works of Abu Nasr al-Farabi, in 2008 visited the Syrian capital, Damascus, where the great thinker of the East, al-Farabi, found his last shelter. Surprisingly, the Aksakal Abdullah discovered that in Damascus they know about the Syrnai of Farabi. In Damascus, there are mountains similar to our Karatau. It is called Kasun. I was there. I remember. We left early in the morning. There was a translator with me, a guy from Simei. He studied there at Damascus University. We took a taxi, which means we went to the mountains. The guide was an Arab man, such a very bright man. He pointed out to me one peak, says, "Look, there is a mountain, and it stands along the road where the Silk Road was." So he showed that peak and said, "This mountain is named after your ancestor, the Peak of Farabi." Because as it turns out, Al-Farabi, being already an 80-year-old man, climbed that mountain, took out a small Syrnai from his pocket, and played it. Arabs say that Farabi expressed his longing for the motherland. Al-Farabi compared the music with food, and according to the Damascus legend, the great philosopher of the East really played on the Sazsyrnai. And perhaps that is why the old-timers of southern Kazakhstan called this instrument Sazsyrnai of Farabi. Today in the Farabi Museum, there is a single copy of Sazsyrnai. It was also discovered by Asantai Alimov, but several years later, after the first find. It is small but egg-shaped, made of fired clay. According to scientists, the artifact dates back to the 9th-10th centuries. Let me try to play on Farabi's Sazsyrnai. Here, this little instrument dates back to the times of Al-Farabi. This is kind of Sazsyrnai. It was studied in detail by Bolat Sarbayev. The great thing is to give back the ancient melody to people, but no less great to recreate a musical instrument. Having done a tremendous job, Bolat Sarbayev revived the Sazsyrnai. Now it is a full-fledged musical instrument with 6 holes and a wider range. To this day, all Kazakh craftsmen make Sazsyrnai on the model that Bolat Sarbayev recreated, and they do not allow a millimeter of error in the size of the tool, in the diameter of the holes, or in the distance between them. The revived Sazsyrnai sounded for the first time on the stage of the conservatory named after Kurmangazy. It was 1975. Sazsyrnai sounded in a trio of Uskurik and Shankobuz. So Bolat Sarbayev reconstructed the instrument and literally breathed life into the ancient Sazsyrnai. It will take a little more time, and this small folklore ensemble will be interchanged into an ethnographic orchestra of national musical instruments. They will be called Oturar Sazı, Melody of Oturar, in honor of that small clay whistle from the ancient settlement. In general, the history of the orchestra began. He brought the Sazsyrnai to the orchestra. Together with the masters, they perfected this little instrument. They expanded it to an octave, making it chromatic. And from that moment on, it became an orchestral instrument, retaining a very old sound with sand as from time immemorial. The orchestra Oturar Sazı is a unique phenomenon in the art of world music. It is called a living museum of sounds, which showed the world the richness of the Kazakh folk instruments. The revival of Sazsyrnai did not stop there. In different regions of Kazakhstan, archaeologists discover a wide variety of versions of this clay instrument. So in Almaty, in the Museum of Folk Musical Instruments, named Iklas, artifacts are stored, which are also related to Sazsyrnai. This artifact was found during excavations of ancient Taraz. It is called Dungurshek. It is made of raw clay and preserved, and inside of Dungurshek there were stones with the size of a bead, which played the role of a rattle. The find is not fully stored, it was damaged. Another Sazsyrnai was also found on the side of Oturar. It is small, 6 cm long, total volume 15 cm. It has 4 holes for the game. However, the instrument, due to its damage, now does not make any sounds. Today, employees of the research department of the Museum of Folk Musical Instruments are engaged in a detailed study of existing artifacts. The fund of the museum stores over 15 types of various Sazsyrnai. Among them there are archaeological finds, as well as the work of modern masters. Studying the works of Bulat Sarıbayev, I created these types. From the research of a scientist, I learned that our ancestors had such similar to Sazsyrnai tools, such as Wildek, Tastavuk, Shanuravuk, Kusairavuk. And I was excited to give all these versions, to give them a certain tone, to expand the range by creating a whole group of Sazsyrnai tools. Unfortunately, today the location of the very first Sazsyrnai is not known. The first one became the prototype of the modern tool. However, we can imagine how it looked thanks to master Kendibaykar Abdalov. This man created a copy of the lost artifact from the drawings and stories of the teacher from Oturar, Asantay Alimov. Based on the words of Asantay Alimov, I created a copy of the old Sazsyrnai, which was found in Oturar. Alimov described in details to me, even drew an instrument. He said he sent such kind of forms. Inspired by the ancient instrument, the master later created his own Sazsyrnai model and gave it the name Oturar Wildek. This is the spiritual heritage. If our descendants play on this sacred instrument, they will not lose themselves as a nation. They will preserve their culture. And so, it will be passed on from generation to generation. This is the code of the nation. They say that a great step lives in the soul of Sazsyrnai. Probably from this small clay instrument, similar to the heart, keeps in itself everything that is close to the spirit of the nomadic people. In its sounds, you can hear the howling of the wind, the sound of a mountain river, the singing of birds, a wolf's howl, or a bitter cry. Listen, and the old Sazsyrnai will tell you the story of this land, which has been kept for centuries.